Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Functionally Enlightened podcast. I am completely honored. It's a great joy to have Mary Ruddick with us today. And I will give you a brief bio so that you understand how I know Mary and the impact that she's had in global communities. So, Mary Ruddick, dubbed the Sherlock Holmes of Health for her unique ability to expeditiously assess and remediate rare neuromuscular conditions that others have deemed impossible. Mary Ruddick is an ancestral nutritionist and an experiential anthropologist who specializes in neuromuscular disorders, infertility, and disabling chronic disease. She can regularly be found endangering herself in the untouched corners of the world to learn from and distill the wisdom from the last remaining traditional cultures. She shares her findings and knowledge via her sought-after keynote speeches, over 100 podcast appearances, and has published numerous articles. So her work is in front and behind the camera. So we welcome you again, Mary. So excited to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really nice.
So to introduce you again to my audience, a lot of my audience is their fellow chronic illness warriors. They've experienced conditions such as dysautonomia, mast cell activation syndrome, and the whole gambit that revolves around that umbrella. So
Yes, the awful umbrella. Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah,
to start us off, can you please share a little bit about your chronic illness to wellness journey and to lead
sure.
us into what drove you into this passionate type of work?
Yes. So if you don't mind, I'll start with the end. What really drives me today is the fact that when we are diagnosed with these conditions and also when we're dealing with them day to day, there's a ceiling put on them. And I don't know about you all, but I was told, if you had it for this amount of years, then you'd have it forever. And it just kind of goes downhill from here. And the trajectory wasn't very accurate, which is understandable unless you've lived through it. But but it can keep you in a box. And so one of the reasons why I've been running around so quickly to the last indigenous regions is because when I go there, people are in perfect health. And if people knew what was normal, as opposed to what we accept as normal, we would be outraged. So with things like MCAS and dysautonomia, it's very isolating to have these conditions, right? I don't know about you, but when I got sick, I didn't even want to talk about it. I didn't tell most people when I could go to school, my teachers didn't know. And it was because how do you talk about it? It changes constantly. And it's constantly symptoms that are weird, right? They're just weird. Maybe more normal today because it's much more common now. But that's awful, right? I mean, it's not something we want to be common. I don't want anyone to deal with this. And so I've really been kind of running around seeing how to get rid of it. So to back up to the beginning, I was researching in a field station when I was 18 in the tropics and got an infection that went to my brain. Now, we don't know if it was the initial infection or my body's response to it, but my fever went up over 106 and it stayed there for 6 days. That damages the nervous system for most people, if not all. And it certainly did for me. It damaged my hypothalamus, my pituitary, amongst others. So I ended up with dysautonomia and a severe case. Now, we didn't know what it was for many years. It wasn't until I think year 7 or 8 where we had accurate nerve testing and QSARTs done and all of that. But I was a very active, very extroverted athlete. So to go from self-training 2 to 4 hours a day to not being able to get out of bed, it was very noticeable for my family. And so everyone was pretty alarmed, but also confused as you get confused with these conditions. And so now I see people getting diagnosed more faster. It's never really fast enough. And the diagnosis in and of itself, for me, it was a big relief. So I'm grateful people are able to get those, and I certainly wish those for anyone who's in the fog. But it also doesn't give you a solution, and I think we're very limited on what we put as solutions. And so, for me, as the years went on with dysautonomia, it got much, much worse. I got more nerve damage, I got more organ damage, and I lost enormous amounts of weight. most of you will probably fluctuate with going up and down. I certainly did. And then towards the end, got really, really, really skinny, like skeletal. And so at a certain point, my parents and I, because I was back home, I couldn't take care of myself, as I'm sure you can imagine, kind of looked at each other and were like, this isn't working. What we had been doing was very Western medicine. It was before the time of YouTube and self-education. And so my mom went to the store and got some books. And we started looking outside of just the regular Western medicine sphere. And I will say with that along with all the frogs, I had some wonderful physicians who really, really cared, like really genuinely good, like family style physicians, but family style meaning they knew about me and my family and they cared about us, and that was very clear. But I wasn't getting better. I was getting much, much worse, and significantly so. And so I started doing a lot of research, and we started trying things, things that seem silly, I'm sure, to many people, or simple or too easy. But I had this epiphany one day. It was spurred on by a brother-in-law of mine, but I had this epiphany that nobody was going to do this for me. No one was coming to my rescue. There was no doctor creating a medication in a lab that was going to give my old life back. And so I realized, one, I needed to fully sever everything I loved and didn't love about my old life. Like, just really let that go, like fully. And two, which was very cathartic. I didn't expect that to be, but it was very cathartic. And then two, that if I was going to get better, it was going to come from me. And that really shifted my mindset to thinking big picture, like medicine, surgery, what can be done, to little picture, what can I do in this moment? How am I communicating to nature right now? Am I communicating that I want to die? Or am I communicating that I want to be here? And turning from the kind of dialogue that we have of fighting an illness to seeing it as a game and seeing how I might win. And in the process, kind of stopped caring if I won, because life got so good. And I think that's when you know you're winning a game.
That resonates so much. And I especially like the fact that you're discussing that mental component, because a lot of people in the chronic illness community, they really do suffer and they do feel kind of separated from even their closest family. So I appreciate that you capitalize on that. And, speaking candidly with you and with our audience, before I met you, I was also in that vicious cycle of trying to seek out the help, trying to get answers to what it was, putting a label to all of the symptoms, which is impossible when you have so many symptoms, for sure.
Yes.
So in speaking with you, I guess there's so much that I want to say about you and your methods, but I know that what worked for me well was understanding that, first off, there's no one type of protocol that's going to fit everybody. And so you give people the knowledge and you give people the confidence to try these things that might seem new to them or might seem counterintuitive, but some people really need that structure. So when you're dealing with people, I don't know if you're dealing with clients directly right now, but if you're dealing with someone who does have dysautonomia to the extent that you've had and that I've had, do you recommend that they go all in and like full force, or do you kind of ease them into like a slower transition?
Oh, that's a really good question. It actually does depend on the case. So on one hand, you have the issue of you're going to feel awful anyway. So do you want to feel awful for a reason, like getting to your goal, or do you want to feel awful for feeling awful sake because you're sick, right? So I like to really shift the focus, because you could go into having one of these conditions with an incredible mindset, and you could get churned out like ground beef at the end, because it is incredibly isolating and invalidating to go through these conditions, right? You question yourself frequently. And I think there's a lot to that. We were kind of raised in this dialogue of chronic illness is a thing over here, and then we have immediate illness, and we have great cures for that. And so when you yourself get sick, if you're anything like me, I don't want to expect that you are, but I certainly just thought, oh, it's no big deal. Go take care of it or I'll die. And and the truth is there's this huge, it was very naive, as a kid, but there's this huge subset of illness that's really taking over the medical sphere that is the opposite of that. It's worse than a purgatory. It's a living hell that you're stuck in. And I think one of the most unsettling things is the changing nature of it, because how can you tell anyone that you'll be there for them or tell yourself? So you lose self-confidence. It doesn't matter if you think you're great. You lose self-confidence because you can't count on yourself to be there at certain times. And people assume maybe you're lazy or flaky. It's very human if someone hasn't been through it to expect character flaw as opposed to real impossibility. So I think the isolation and the loneliness and the mental aspect is a huge aspect. It obviously doesn't make us sick. It doesn't, but it does negate how we go about the journey. Meaning, I had my first 8 years were just a living hell inside my body, if we're allowed to use that word, I don't know. And then I had this switch when I was bedbound, this really sudden switch to where everything became very beautiful. And the condition was still there and the pain was still there. And I think if we can cultivate that in ourselves, and if we can learn it, right? We're not different from each other, really. We like to think we are, but we're not that different from each other. So if we study what survivors have been like, even those who do it naturally, like one of my favorite people, she's a Holocaust survivor. She was Elise Somner. She makes my heart sing. But she seemed to come at this very naturally. And so I would study people that went through extreme difficulty in different ways than maybe you or I, and really soared through kind of on eagle's wings, right? And then saw how I might cultivate that. And what's interesting about that is that when I go to the indigenous regions, each of them have in their own unique way ways of cultivating mental hardiness. A thing that some of us get from our families if we're lucky, or from certain sports, but it's not deeply in our culture the way maybe it was, I'm not sure, but certainly is in the cultures that I go to.
And when you travel, do you tend to notice that everyone has a sense of purpose within their communities more so than in the traditional like Western culture?
Well, what's interesting about that is that no one's seeking. So we have all of these choices in front of us, and choices for humans gives us a paradox, right? We can get frozen, and really in these cultures there's less choice, but they're far more free than I've seen anyone in our culture be. They're very present almost all the time. When you're present, you're not driven towards a purpose, right? You're not working towards something. You're here and you're in joy, right? Enjoy. What I took away, and this is long before my indigenous work, but one of the things that really shifted the needle for me was to not think about a minute from now or 5 minutes from now or tomorrow or next year, but to actually just bring it back to like this instant. And can I find something lovely in this instant? Not the big things, the big things like family and things like that we're obviously grateful for, but because they're obvious, we tend to not evoke the emotions that bring us that sense of joy and peace. So I would go for really, really tiny things and made it into a game. Like I said, if I caught myself talking about in my head, thinking about, okay, let's say I have this doctor's appointment at 2 o'clock today. Okay, so 6 hours to go. I better like really work up for this, right? Then I would catch myself and say, how much do you really want to heal? Let's bring it back. And then just consistently bring it back. Because one thing that I did know from the studies and the research was that when we're calm, which is a Herculean task with a chronic illness, especially one that causes physical pain as well as emotional pain, when we're calm, the body can do its thing. Right? It can regenerate. It really can't regenerate properly when we're under stress. Just human and normal to be under stress. So it's extra difficult.
That's amazing again about being mindful of the present moment. And you mentioned there, like that's dead on the way it is. When we're in that chronically ill state and we do feel increased symptoms, then we do typically try to look for that outside support, and we need to really bring it back in to ourselves. And that's one of the things that I think I hear from you, like practicing that gratitude. So for those people who are stuck in that other state of mind, what are some helpful ways that they can transition and be able to pivot into that state of gratitude?
I would say, I would have punched myself in the face if I heard someone talking about gratitude when I was going through it. So, like, I get it. If you go after me in the comment section, go for it. I get it. I think really what it is that we have to care more about getting better than about being validated. That's really what it is. So we can search and search and search for a key to get better, for that one thing, but it's never one thing, right? We see people with the same condition, definitely dysautonomia, heal in multiple different ways, right? It's not one thing. It may be a combination of things. If you think about it differently and think about it more as a communication. So like if you're right now in this moment, your posture, your mental posture, your physical posture, all of the ways, are you communicating to nature that you want to be here or not? Most likely, if you're in pain, it would be the opposite communication. And that's not a judgment, that's a human reaction. But you can tweak that, right? So if you're in physical pain, you're going to curl down, right? Well, when the nervous system does this, it affects our hormones a lot, our stress hormones as well as others. And hormones equal our quality of life, right? We often think about them as sex hormones or too much estrogen, so I have PCOS and it's really painful, these kind of things. But really, they are what give us our joy and our ease. And so if we can master the hormonal system, not necessarily through supplements and things like that, but like really learn how the hormonal system works with our environment and then shift from there, you can get somewhere. So for instance, you want to set yourself up for success. Now, if you have dysautonomia, and most people with MCAS also have dysautonomia, maybe not all, but most, if you're sitting in a chair like I am right now with your feet down, you're setting yourself up for a bad day. So there's a lot of micro things that you can do through the day, even when you need to be on, to where you can have a better day and then a better next day. So that would be like keeping your feet up in cross-legged position, right? Not letting your hands hang all the way down so that the blood pools down, laying down on your back and then switching over when you're laying down. So if you're on your back, your posture is proper. That means like on the bed or on the couch, right? Even on the floor, that means you're going to produce your serotonin that you need to wake you up, which who wakes up well in this condition? So you really need that, right? Learning about the lighting system and things that you can control. Maybe not focusing, I never suggest, do what you want to do, but I never suggest focusing on the things we can't control, but the things that you can control. So let's say the lighting in your house is really bad and you don't have financial support and you can't afford new lighting. Don't even think about it. Just cross that off the list and go to the next thing. So you focus on the things that you can control, but you do always question if that's true. So it's very easy often to write things off on a true stance, on an honest stance, as I cannot do that. But if you can break it down into micro things, often you can. So let's take finances of a light bulb. Let's say you have a really bright blue light that's just up top in your bedroom and you don't have a nightstand, nothing else. Okay, and it's not in your budget to get a blue light blocking bulb or a red bulb. Okay, so don't. And then wait till that light bulb burns out and then just get one of the orange Halloween ones that's like $1.50, right? So there's like little ways around it. And you'll notice a kind of shifting to that is much less stressful. That said, there's a lot of urgency with these conditions, because for many years, and for many people, maybe permanently, or at least while they're dealing with it, you're well enough to be putting things on your calendar for some folks, but not well enough to fully function. So there's always kind of this momentum of like, I've got to get myself going. I've got to get myself going and like fit into society. And that can be a big weight to carry. And so anything that you can do that can minimize that, lessen that, then that can really help the hormonal picture for your immune system and for your cellular regrowth.
Those practical tips are really helpful, and it brings to mind a couple of things. There's two that I'd like you to touch up on. First off, the hormonal imbalances and things that are, dietary changes. When I was first beginning trying to recover after a surgery, I was also bedbound for quite some time. And so I approached diet as in eating the cleanest, leanest diet, and I essentially deprived myself of those healthy fats. And now we know that, for healthy hormonal balance, some of those things are essential. Can you talk to us about, why cholesterol is not really villain in this case?
Happy to. In fact, it's actually the hero. First, I just want to say I'm so sorry that you've gone through that. That's doesn't matter the amount of time. It's horrific. And I have a feeling it was not small. So I'm really sorry that you went through that. Most of our hormones, specifically our sex hormones, are made from cholesterol. Cholesterol is our healing hormone of the body. So when you have a hormonal and a nervous system disorder, like you do with dysautonomia or MCAS, dysautonomia is a deregulated nervous system, and many studies point towards it definitely being autoimmune, but we can't say definite yet. There are forms that are. It wouldn't be surprising, specifically of the adrenal receptors. All of these hormones need to be made of cholesterol. Now, if you're not consuming enough cholesterol, then we're not going to make enough of these hormones. Specifically, we can't remyelinate the nerves, we can't regenerate the nervous system or regrow the nervous system. So the food system of both the nervous and the immune system is saturated fat. So we really need that for those cell walls and for the cell regeneration. It's quite essential. And unfortunately, what we've done unconsciously as a culture is that in the last, really since World War II, we've been increasing the carbohydrates. Now, historically, carbohydrates have not been a problem for certain cultures. Of course, there's certain cultures I study with that eat zero and others that eat some. But no time on earth has a whole public eaten carbohydrates the way that we have. And certainly not at a time when we've been damaging the microbiome. That's another talk. So in regards to hormones, when we spike our blood sugar, our cholesterol has to go out and save the day. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that cholesterol is the healing hormone of the body, right? So that's like your ambulance going to the hospital. Would we want to cut off the ambulance? No, we need the ambulance, right? And that is what cholesterol is. So when our blood sugar spikes, it's actually a deadly situation in the body. We don't feel that unless you have certain health conditions, because our cholesterol goes and saves the day. But when it's busy, consistently regulating your blood sugar levels due to your diet or our diet, no blame there. We all took part. The cholesterol is not then available for non-life essential functions, which is making our hormones. Our hormones make us feel good or like dying, but they don't tend to save our life, right? And so cholesterol is going to focus on the blood sugar over the hormones. So that's why we've had kind of this epidemic of blood sugar issues, from spiking our blood sugar first thing in the morning with the carbohydrates, avoiding cholesterol, which is an essential nutrient of the body. Carbohydrates are not, they're actually optional fully. Carbohydrates and fiber are both optional. We don't get sick or die without them. And that's clinically speaking. Okay, you may feel awful when you cut them out. I did, but clinically speaking, you won't die. So you can't say that for the reverse. The fat is essential. So is protein. So cholesterol is quite the opposite of the villain. And I think you certainly your listeners will find out. I imagine you know a lot, but your listeners will learn the farther you go in this journey, the more you start to see that everything is a bit upside down. That things that we've learned, it's really the reverse that tends to get you to the places that you want to go. If you think back to Alice in Wonderland, it's really a perfect analogy, because really everything is upside down and everything's a bit twisted. So you have to take things at face value and try different things out.
What are your thoughts on the ketogenic diet? And more specifically, something that I've been reading a lot more on is like fasting mimicking, and there's a brand called Prolon, if you've heard of that. Can you let us know what your thoughts are on those things?
I have to know more about the brand, but uh, ketogenic ketogenic diet and ketosis specifically is amazing for dysautonomia. Not always appropriate for MCAS. It depends how high your histamines are when you transition. And I would say, well, I meet almost no one who feels good when they transition. But that doesn't negate them going into remission with that protocol. And it can take a very long time. So you and I and anyone who's had these issues, when I say a long time, I don't mean a week. I mean months. Like, you can feel awful for months. I was much worse for the first 4 months. And I didn't just do ketosis. So I was in ketosis when I went into remission, and I'm in ketosis most of the time, definitely for the first, gosh, I don't know, 8 years out of remission. But not because I had to be. I actually prefer it. But that alone didn't do it. Not just getting into ketosis. I really recommend, when you're dealing with a condition with the nervous system and with the immune system, it's so myriad, that the more things you can bring in, the better. So if you can picture yourself in the middle of a spoke, middle of a bike wheel, and you have spokes going out in all directions, ketosis is one of yours, if that's one of the protocols that you follow. Right? And then there need to be others. So for me, I also needed the full elimination of all starch and complex sugars. So I really needed to do the real GAPS intro. And that was brutal. That was brutal. And I can't say enough. Like, I couldn't pay me to go through it again. I mean, I would do it if I was sick, but you take feeling really bad every day, like, emphasize really, and then you elevate that a lot. So it's a very difficult thing to get through mentally. So you really need that mental game on point going in if you can. But I do have some people that I don't recommend it from the get-go. So some people that have had thyroidectomies, so they're really, really, really disabled, like on an extreme level. And also, if histamines are extremely high, we might do carnivore first, not ketosis, not high fat, to start to downgrade the histamines, or a vegetable-based antihistamine, but not the starch. So I have different ways of bringing people in. And one of the advantages of seeing so many thousands of people is that you see the patterns. And so when you're talking to someone, you can identify, like, okay, I'm going to be a little bit more slow with this one, and this one needs to go faster than they're going. They've just been hurt a lot in the past. We need to get them through it, kind of thing. And that said too, there's also periods for it. Like, there's times where you, in your own journey, want to shoot, 2 birds with 1 stone, and other times where you just need to, like, keep your head above water and not progress. And so there is a level of it with integrity and with deep authenticity to yourself, not to anyone else, but to yourself, seeing where you're at with it, and giving things a real shot. Because I see so many people going with intuition in the beginning. And in the beginning, we don't have intuition. We have our overgrowths of the microbiome. So our whole body will say, you need to eat that cracker, or you need that cup of rice, or you need that potato. And that's not you, because your human cells don't require that, right? It's only overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth from your microbiome that can use that carbohydrate. So really, the intuition comes in later. And it's been a fascinating thing to watch with people, because some of my clients, like, no matter what they say, I'm going to say, yeah, I want you to eat that, because they're so on point. And I can give the reasoning behind it and the scientific reasoning behind it. But in general, in the beginning, never. Never. You can't trust what your body wants. Your body wants to stay, and your mind wants to stay where it is, which is a state of very severe chronic illness. But that's less stressful, than changing. Changing is a huge stress for the body. So we tend to want to go back to what is our normal. Okay? That's why you see people repeat cycles of trauma and things like this. It's the norm. The same for the body and the same for the mind in chronic illness. So we tend to seek things out that may be self-sabotaging unknowingly, very unknowingly, because to be honest, most people do not know what would get them better and what don't. That's why I'm constantly giving talks. But because the information is not readily out there. But if you look at someone who self-sabotages, that's not sick. Okay, so let's take, because, oh my gosh, we've all had our characters defamated enough, right? So let's not go after that. I want you guys to give yourself a hug instead. But if you take someone instead, let's take someone who wants to lose 10 pounds and they're perfectly healthy and they have a great life. Okay, everything's going for them. They want to lose 10 pounds. They're consistently wanting to lose 10 pounds. They're consistently doing something for 2 days and then sabotaging. In this kind of situation, it is relaxing to know the outcome. It's really relaxing to know the outcome. And if you've sabotaged or done something in the past to where you know the outcome, it's actually an element of control that comes in. And when you have so little control in your life, that is more desirable than a possible different outcome, even if that's your end goal. And so you always want to really hold yourself up to your own mirror, right? Really your own, because like I said, people with chronic illness get judged horrifically. So I'm not saying to bring in judgment, really instead bring in a lot of self-love and a real kind of come to Jesus talk with yourself of like, can I live with this going forward? What am I willing to do? And what am I willing to do consistently every day, long term, before I see results? Because that's really what it takes.
Yeah, that's a fascinating concept because we do need to have a drive for the outcome more than sometimes we do live in the present moment. It's good to come back, but it's sometimes we're in a state where it's probably we're feeling more negative at the moment, but we still have that
Yes.
drive to continue on. There's a better picture in the future. And so I say it's hope. Like if we don't have hope for a better future, then we lose our, lack of a better term, our sense of purpose for the here and now, and for our ability to help and reach out to others who may have experienced similar or maybe not so similar, but equally disabling conditions. And I see that in a lot of your work, like you're reaching out to everyone globally.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because I feel that people don't know that they can get better, right? We're told these things are incurable. And I think there's too much hope in the chronic illness communities. And I don't think hope gets us better. I think it gets us sad and devastated. I think what we can bank on is focusing on the systems that need help, right? So your nervous system, your immune system with histamines as well, right? Whatever system it is, then break that down into micro things that you can do every day. Because when you're working towards something, you relax. You get a lot of dopamine, right? And so what tends to happen with the chronic conditions, and especially chronic conditions that come at the cost of mitochondrial energy, to where, picking up a pen is something you have to talk yourself into, is that there's a lot of ups and downs. Like, oh, I did great today. I did these things. And then the next day, nothing. And maybe for 2 weeks, nothing. And you can't. And then you're able to do a little bit. And then there's backlash. And so there's all this jagged back and forth, which is devastating. And you just keep hoping for that day that you're going to wake up and feel a little bit better, right? Whereas when you have a strategy, like a real strategy, like, yep, I feel like I've been hit by a truck and pulled behind it for 80 miles and nobody around me gets it. So I have to pretend like I feel okay. Nobody's baking a casserole. And I have things that I have to get to, and my alarm does not wake me up because my circadian rhythm is fully off with the rest of my nervous system. and my fever is going up, and it'll probably be down in 20 minutes, like too low, right? And so you have all these things to deal with. It's it's easy to bank on hope, but really what you want to cultivate is a strategy and faith in yourself. You don't go through these conditions without, I'm sure no one wants it, but a lot of grit. You end up with a lot of grit, right? And you end up with a lot of fortitude. And if you can apply that towards micro disciplines in your life, you can start to recommunicate with the nervous system and the hormonal system and eventually balance that out. And it is a waiting game of consistency, but it is so much more effective than hope, because I find so many people hope for things and then they die, you know? And I think if we go towards real concentrated, focused faith in the body to be able to heal, and then understanding it, even with our brain fog, just knowing like, okay, nervous system needs saturated fat. It's good for dysautonomia. Now let's take a really bad case of MCAD or MCAS, right? Put that on top, right? Because a lot of histamine always comes with dysautonomia, but not the very significant forms always, right? Those are different. So let's say we've got both. Well, we can't go really high fat because fat gets digested slowly, at least not at first, right? And so more histamine is going to be released from the body, even though it's a no histamine food. Well, in that case, you work with what you can. You do the lean protein, or you do the antihistamine, you bring the histamines down, and then you transition and you use the fat when you can. And you strategize, actually. You very slowly bring it in and you watch the reactions to the body. And not reactions in the way that we've been taught. You know, we've really been raised in the immediate illness sphere of like, okay, you have a headache, you take a Tylenol, right? And so if we get a symptom, like let's say you have histamines and you're trying some yogurt for the first time, right? And your histamines go high. Let's say your reaction is insomnia, which is a very common one, right? We don't necessarily yank it out. We're going to see, well, let's try less. Let's try a quarter of a teaspoon and see what happens there, right? Because for many people, not all, I'm not a yogurt Nazi, but for a lot of people, yogurt actually lowers the histamines, which makes no sense. It should be kefir, FYI. Kefir has the antihistamine strain, but you don't have you have to stop the knee-jerk reactions of like, I do this, then this happens, because with an imbalanced nervous system and immune system, you're going to be chasing after something that you can never catch, because it's going to change upon each condition, not just what you eat, how you slept, who you interacted with, what the lighting is doing around you. There are far too many factors that play into these conditions. It genuinely play into these conditions, not in a pie in the sky kind of way, but it's actually very well studied what affects the nervous system and the immune system, and a lot of it is physically what surrounds us. So you can have a lot of factors around that. So having less knee-jerk reactions and more focus on what those systems actually need. What does my immune system need to regenerate? Saturated fat. Does it need starch? Nope. Do I feel happy when I eat starch? Yeah. So then you have to decide, what do you want? Are you really happy if you're eating starch and you're sick in bed? No, you're not really happy, right? You want to go for the real happiness. And I think what you said earlier, you can absolutely use the negative. You're human. Who's not going to feel distraught and negative going through this? Of course, I can't, well, okay, if anyone goes through this without feeling that, like, call me, because I'm interested in your psychology. But you can use the negative too. I, to be perfectly honest with you, was more motivated by the negative than I was with the positive. So with small things like a goal of mine, I'm more positively oriented. Like if I say, okay, I'll get myself this blender if I do this thing, I will work for that blender. But if it's a big deal, like being disabled was, I could imagine my future if I didn't die soon. And that was that I'm in America with no health system. My parents are much older, right? They were old when they had me, and so they weren't going to be here forever. My medication is 2,000 to 5,000 a month, depending on what I'm taking. That doesn't include shelter or getting to and from places, and I couldn't work or put a thought together. So like, and the breathing machine alone, the breathing machine was my biggest motivation. Honestly, I hated that thing. So you can absolutely do that. I oftentimes, when I was first starting the ketogenic GAPS diet, and I would smell something delicious or see wonderful food or just even think of something that wasn't even around me that I really wanted, I would just immediately put it up to the thought of that darn breathing machine. Like, which one do I want? So I think you can absolutely use the negative as a motivator too. Yes.
I think in my case, it was the opposite. I couldn't handle even any odors, whether it was a pleasant odor, any odors was a turn off. And I had food aversion so severe that I didn't want to eat. And that's probably one of the causes for increased kind of symptoms and, losing the weight, inability to move and losing strength. So it kind of was a downward spiral. But in meeting you and again learning some of your methods, I think some of the more helpful things that I've personally processed and gathered was you're supporting the system in incremental steps, but you're also eliminating the stressors that are impacting you, whether it's an environmental stressor or emotional stressor, mental stressors. So how can you get that across to people listening right now, that it's not just, I mean, you have to do all of this together.
It all has to be done together. So I have a program for dysautonomia, and I've been refining it, and histamines. It's all included, nervous system disorders, neuropathy. But I've been refining it for years because I really want to make it into a passive program that's very inexpensive, because people who are sick cannot afford anything, right? But I've been refining it because even though I've worked with it for well over a decade and helped so many people get into remission, doing it passively is very different. Because when I have someone one-on-one or in a group, I can call things out and I can really specify. If I give an at-home program, nobody's calling anyone out. And unfortunately, with these conditions, unless it's someone who's had it, they can't really call you out, because we're not going to respect someone who hasn't had these conditions, right? Telling us that we should just get up at this time and do this and that. But it really is, it's really the multitude of 100 tiny things that you do every single day that get you better. And I would love it to be in a pill. It would be a lot easier, a lot faster, but it really is a condition that you can work your way out of through communication. But you really do have to think about all of it. Like, okay, what's my posture communicating? That I'm confident, I'm going to be producing serotonin. Am I slumped over? Anyone with these illnesses is going to be slumped over. You don't have the muscles, right? So you want to think about how to adapt, like I mentioned earlier, laying on your back, really forcing a lot of things, but only in small ways and not the ways it's been done before. So most people will like force exercise, right? But you can't. You have to be, I don't know about you, I had to get really humbled. I had to get like so humbled so many times. And I don't know if there's a way that we can help people not go through that. But if there is, I would really like that. Because you have those days where maybe before you got sick, it would be a sick day that you would call off, right? But now it's like your best day you've ever had in the last 7 years. And so you feel like, I'm going to try jogging. And you jog for 5 minutes and then you cry all night in terrible nerve pain, and you're, in bed for weeks. So you have that up and down all the time. And so you say, oh, I've tried exercise. No, you can't. You have to have consistency. So I see a lot of the dysautonomia programs doing, and honestly, I want to say first, if it helps you, great, do it, whatever helps you, do it. But what I see a lot of them do is okay, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you do this exercise, and Tuesday, Thursday, you do this. It's often one too much in certain ways and too little in others, and it's inconsistent. And so you keep up with this pattern where you're like, I don't know if I can do this today. Let's judge it. Instead of doing something less than you can physically do, let's say 10 seconds on a stationary bike, okay? Or the bed-bound exercises, like lifting your shoulders a certain amount. And then every day or every week, you consistently do it every day and then build on it. You start to get your self-confidence back. And your body gets regulation, which is massive, right? If your body knows when you're going to eat, when you're going to sleep, when you're going to have light, then it starts to regulate a lot for you, which granted is it a bit of a catch-22 with this condition because you often don't have control of when you can eat, right? I went through that too, just no appetite at all. You often have to distract, right? Which doesn't help you assimilate nutrients. And then also the sleep is super difficult for that as well. There's ways around that. There's ways to kind of force it to where you do start waking up and you do start sleeping. And it's maybe not considered good compared to what you were before you were sick, but it's a big improvement. You can see that. So, you know, I hope, if nothing else, people hearing the stories of myself and so many others, that you don't think it's just like you're sick and then you're better, because it's not. It is a whole mountain range of ups and downs and humbling and elation, and then another humbling and more elation. And what I can say as a practitioner now who's seen so many people go through it, and you know, who gets there and who doesn't, not just with these conditions, but in general, it really comes down to not character, not personality. It comes down to if you're in a place where you can have enough grit to get through even more difficulty than you're in now, which is a tall order, but enough humbleness to not overdo it, and enough non-reaction to not pull the trigger too quickly and quit. Those things really need to be in place, which for me took desperation. I don't know how anybody else does it without that, but really, because the things that work don't work like medicine. They don't work overnight, and they don't give you that relief that you're looking for. So you have to go against intuition very often.
So humility and consistency, both things we need to hold on to. And in terms of, I
Yes.
know you've been traveling a lot. I'm not even, you're probably traveling currently. I'm just wondering if you're currently working with people, or how can people reach out to you or to your staff to get more information on your protocols and your programs?
Great question. So I actually gave my private practice away years ago when it was a big difficult choice for me, to be honest, because for many years I felt really torn about, do I turn what I've, you know, what I know about dysautonomia and that cluster, the umbrella, MCAS, into something that other practitioners can use? Or do I keep doing my one-on-ones and my groups? Because I feel, you know, it's very deep work when you work with someone. You get to know their whole family, and then you meet their friends, you know, and they get better, they refer people they know. So you end up knowing this whole network, and it's just a very enriching thing to do. So I looked forward to every single day, and I stay in touch with everyone, and I care very deeply about them. It's not like a job. And so, so I never wanted to let that go. And also, having been the patient, I know a lot of people go big picture, and I could change, right? So take this with a grain of salt, but go big picture and say, oh, you should write a book because that'll help a lot more people, or you should do this. But having been the patient, I know, like if there's one person sick in front of me, that person really matters, you know? And so to take time away to put something like that together didn't feel right until you know, the big world event happened, and suddenly cases of dysautonomia went up to 70 million. And that's when I had a very long think. And then I wrote a letter to my private practice saying that I was going to take a break, thinking it would be 6 months to put this together, a program for dysautonomia and for practitioners. because if you can teach practitioners what to do, then millions of people can be helped. So I've been speaking at medical conferences and teaching what I know, teaching practitioners as often as I can, but I am working on a passive program. So right now I have a program for dysautonomia and MCAS and all of those, but it's very intensive. It's a 12-week kickstarter. Don't think you'll get better in 12 weeks. You often don't. It's some people do, and I'm grateful for them, but it's the hardest time is the first 3 months. And so I have practitioners work with you 4 days a week, live, right? So it's a lot. And then I've recorded hundreds, I think we're up to 900 videos that I've recorded, so that when your brain is back on and you want to learn, you can, but you don't have to. And then I give a whole roadmap out of that. So like I said, I'm constantly refining that so that I can get it into a truly passive program, because that is my end goal. And as soon as the remissions link up to when it's passive versus a full staff, that will happen. And hopefully that'll be in the next few months to year. Oh my gosh, can we get it done faster? People need help. And then otherwise, you can find me just on maryruddick.com. Enableyourhealing.com is the dysautonomia program. It's linked from my website on enableyourhealing.com. If you're interested in my tribal work and indigenous work, that's often briefly on my Instagram whenever I have Wi-Fi. And then I have a YouTube channel under my name too, very minimal. Again, I've been out of Wi-Fi a lot. If I haven't been working with clients, then I've been doing research in the indigenous lands, but hoping to spend a lot more time in Wi-Fi zones this year, putting all that together for you all.
We appreciate that. We'll make sure to include all of those links in our show notes. Mary, we do appreciate it. I know our audience is probably going to be looking you up now and making sure to get all the great insight that you share on these numerous talks. And we're looking forward to hearing of your adventures out there.
Good. Well, listen, please do take home. Getting better is more than possible. It is definitely a route, and it will not feel like it for a really long time. And there are so many ways to summit that mountain. So you will see people go into remission with your condition going this way and that way. And you just take that as confidence that you can get better. Even if you try that method and that doesn't work for you, don't lose faith. Keep working towards your nervous system and your immune system. We're constantly learning more and more. I mean, I have been down some rabbit holes on L-serine and on the way that light affects our microbiome and our nervous system. It would blow your mind. It's blowing my mind. So we are constantly learning more, but we know enough to where it is possible to get better. And then also just never, as much as you can, give yourself a lot of grace, because what you're going through is much harder than probably you even realize, right? Oftentimes we don't really realize what we've been through until we come out of it. It can feel awful and wretched, but like really the gravity of it is very significant. So try not to judge yourself. Try to give yourself a lot of grace and an appreciation like you would to a child, because you've been through a lot and you're going through a lot. So
thank you again, Mary, and thank you to the listeners. We'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.